Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast, where we explore the exciting science behind heart rate variability. The material discussed in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. Please check with your medical provider to make sure any suggestions or strategies are right for you. Visit us at the OptimalHRV.com website to learn more about the Optimal HRV app, download a free copy of Matt's book, Heart Rate Variability, and also get show notes and additional resources around heart rate variability and its applications. Welcome, friends, to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. I am Matt. I am back here with Dr. Dave Hopper and Dr. Ina Kazan to continue our Vegas Madness series. So if you didn't listen to the first episode in this series, please go back and listen to it. Dave did an amazing job of talking about the biology of the vagal nerve, the parasympathetic, sympathetic interactions going on in our system, and how he looks at that from the chiropractic medical perspective is how that really impacts our overall health. The other great thing that Dave gave us is a lot of great little biohacks to improve the functioning of the vagus nerve. Like I said, in the mental health arena, never thought I would think about suggesting people gargle every day. And there's these great things that we can do. So in this episode, I want to shift to mental health, because one of the things that I think is so fascinating as somebody who's been, whether I was in school or not, for about 25 years in the mental health profession, I wasn't, we never talked about cranial nerves. I didn't even necessarily knew we had cranial nerves until a few years ago. And now these things seem to be playing such a powerful role, not just in the health of our nervous system, but how that manifests in our mental health as well. And luckily, Dr. Ina Kazan is an amazing expert on this topic. So Ina, I would love for you to start us off by talking about vagal brake, this balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic, and how this all kind of manifests itself into our mental health.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So pretty amazing how, these two little nerves make such a huge difference when it comes to our mental health as well as our physical health. And the reason for that is because the vagal nerve is what's primarily responsible for our ability to regulate ourselves, or something called self-regulation. Self-regulation applies to many aspects, both physiologically and emotionally, but we'll start with the autonomic nervous system, right? So the autonomic nervous system is the one that, is typically responsible for those automatic processes, and we don't need to think about it in order for them to work, like your heart rate and your breathing and your lung function and your kidney function and all those. So your autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic, which is the stress activation part of your nervous system, and the parasympathetic, which is the relaxation part of the nervous system. And interestingly enough, it is the parasympathetic nervous system that is the real regulator when it comes to our activation. The sympathetic nervous system does not have a built-in shut-off mechanism. It just kind of goes up. And what puts on the brakes is the parasympathetic nervous system. So as your sympathetic goes up, the parasympathetic comes on and puts on the brakes when your activation has reached its optimal level. Whatever level of activation you need for, whatever it is that you're doing. If you are running a 400-meter dash, you're going to need a lot of activation. If you are, talking to a bunch of really good friends online, you're going to need not quite so much activation. But the point is that it is the parasympathetic nervous system that regulates our ability to reach that optimal level of regulation. And the vagal nerve comprises about 85% of our parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system, and the vagal nerve are pretty much interchangeable. And, that's probably how we are going to talk about it, in this episode. So the vagal tone refers to the ability of the parasympathetic nervous system to regulate our activation. Right. So this is, on the physiological side. And, you might be wondering, well, what the heck does that have to do with our mental health? But it turns out that so much of our mental health has to do with that very basic ability to regulate our physiology. If you think about it, that activation, right? If you experience moments of anxiety that's hard to control, it's the sympathetic nervous system that comes up, and the parasympathetic is having trouble putting on the brake. So sympathetic just kind of keeps breaking through, and the parasympathetic is not able to regulate that activation. Or if you've ever had a really important challenge, maybe a big performance or an important game or something like that, and you get there and you're just super jittery, and you just can't make yourself get into that optimal zone. It's the same thing, where the sympathetic activation comes up and the parasympathetic is not able to put on the brakes appropriately. Similar things happen with conditions like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and as well as kind of more traditionally physiologically based conditions like chronic pain and headaches and high blood pressure. All of them have a physical and an emotional component, and all of that is regulated by your parasympathetic nervous system.
Awesome.
Quite a bit of research recently, actually, just looking at something like depression, right? And it turns out that, again, the parasympathetic nervous system, a strong parasympathetic nervous system, is really important in our ability to recover from things like depression and trauma.
So Dave, I want to throw it to you, because I historically, and as a non-educated or a person who's gone to a chiropractor a few times in my life, appreciate what you do. I guess I never considered really that I would go to a chiropractor and I might, as a benefit, improve my mental health as well. So I'm interested as this research, which has been there for decades, but I think is really coming to the surface in a new way. I just kind of wonder how your field sort of looks at the mental health aspect of what Ina is talking about here.
So Matt, somebody coming in, we have a lot of patients who come in who are, also have something going on like anxiety, depression. Mm-hmm. And we would never say that we treat or take care of those types of things. But as a benefit of increasing the function of your autonomic nervous system, and helping with regulation of that system, you do see that spillover effect of, okay, wow, now I can handle my anxiety better. Yeah. You're finding that you don't have such a strong reaction to things that you once did. So that's kind of what we get from the chiropractic end. Now, it's it's not going to be the same as what Ina is going to be doing or talking about, because now we are providing that input to your system. We are allowing the system to do what it is doing. Now, what I think is really cool is that, and this is, you guys know, I work with the OTs and speech therapists, mm-hmm. physical therapists, is that somebody like Ina is going to give a tool that, okay, now we have this system that can function like this. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the tool on how to regulate that. So now, so that's another part of it that is, just amazing. And we want to be able to attack things from both ends. And that's where working with people like Ina, like the occupational therapists that I work with and whatnot, where you got to have both. So yeah, it's a regulation standpoint is what we are helping provide, but from a totally different end.
Awesome. And then that was the OTs really taught me that earlier on in my career is, boy, a bouncy chair, a little thing that makes you kind of wiggle your butt on your chair, and you got to kind of focus on that. Headphones to block out. That sensory piece was especially with my work in special education, from a mental health perspective, if we didn't figure that out, I really did not have a whole heck of a lot to offer. So like, I would just joke that I was an OT tech, even though I was running the school. It's like, until we figured out like the sensory part of it, my mental health interventions were, I won't say useless, but I wasn't getting much mileage on it. And that was, I think such a big thinking for me. I was just so lucky to have that gosh, it's about 20 years ago, to really set a foundation for moving forward. So, I want to nerd out a little bit on this, because I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as a trainer, is we need to simplify things in order to communicate them in a short period of time. And I'm wondering, I do this with the brain all the time, because if you don't have like 3 years to talk about the brain, you're going to simplify something along the way. And I've got a few questions here, and I got a world-class expert on the podcast to talk with us about, which I'm really excited. So one is, like, I'm struggling with the sympathetic system always getting the stress label and always getting the fight or flight. And it seems like, because I think what that simplification does in some ways is that it's bad. Like the sympathetic is just gets you in trouble. It's like the amygdala gets you in trouble. And I wonder if the question's even a meaningful question, how could maybe we look at this as, hey, your sympathetic keeps you alive, whether you're in a high stress situation or just us right now. So is my question a good one, or at least one to talk about? And two, can we kind of look at maybe this is not just a bad thing, but something that's more integrated into our total being?
What a great question. Absolutely. You are so right. There is nothing bad about the sympathetic nervous system. It keeps us alive. It keeps us functioning. If my sympathetic nervous system wasn't functioning properly, I'd be asleep under the desk right now.
Right.
So that's, it's incredibly important. And you're right. We don't talk enough about just how important it is, and how, and that it's a normal, healthy, great thing to have. And just like your comparison with the amygdala, right? Imagine, somebody doesn't have an amygdala, right? Or, people whose amygdala is actually smaller than others, the so-called, fearless people, they tend to not live very long.
Yeah.
Right? Because, again, amygdala serves a very important function, even though, yes, it does have that side effect of, being involved in anxiety, which, we as human beings don't like very much and would like to get rid of. And then we don't think about, well, what exactly would that mean? And it's the same thing with the sympathetic nervous system. Yeah, it's involved in anxiety, which we don't like, but oh boy, this is not something you want to get rid of. Right. So the point here is not to, get rid of the sympathetic nervous system and, just be parasympathetic. Well, that's not going to work. The idea is to be well regulated, right? So the sympathetic nervous system is designed to increase your activation. And again, your excellent point that you're making, we're talking about as a stress system, but it's your activation system. It's the part of the body that enables you to rise to whatever level of, physiological and emotional activation you need. So the sympathetic activation goes up, and then yes, we do need to parasympathetic to come on and help regulate that activation. So both parts of the system are important, but there will be nothing to regulate without the sympathetic. Right. Absolutely, incredibly important.
And so when we talk about heart rate variability, I want to kind of save, though it's so hard, breathing as a big part of this, and we can touch on that. That's a whole episode in and of itself. But what I think we're seeing, but I'd love to get your more technical piece of this, is in some ways I see variability, and this is where I struggle with the fight or flight just label on the sympathetic system. Is like, on one hand we have a good, I guess good, there's my highly technical word, a strong activation of the sympathetic, which kind of, and again, correct me here, I'm looking for correction, is you've got the energy you need to bring to your life. So you get that heart rate going up, but then you've got the strong vagal brake on that, which shows, and your book does a great job of this, that you've got good prefrontal cortex, ventral vagal activation. So you've got the emotional regulation, which is so central to cognitive functioning, social relationships. Is that, am I somewhat on target with that way of thinking about it?
Absolutely. Yes. So your vagal nerve not only regulates your physiological activation through the autonomic nervous system, but it absolutely has projections into the prefrontal cortex, and it has a lot to do with emotional regulation. And this is something that we're learning more and more about. Really, like pretty much every day, there is new research coming out. The last few years of just how important the vagal nerve is for the functioning of the brain, and then as far as that interplay of sympathetic and parasympathetic, as we breathe in, the parasympathetic brake, or the vagal brake, kind of comes off, allowing the sympathetic activation to go up and kind of reaching that level that we need, and then once we're there, the vagal brake comes back on and allows that activation to come on down. So as your heart rate increases, that's the vagal brake coming off, and as your heart rate decreases, that's your vagal brake coming back on. And that's that interplay that allows us to keep regulating and keep being flexible, right? Increasing and decreasing our activation as necessary, and as that activation is continuously adjusted, because we are in a range of different level of activation, right? And the higher your heart rate variability, the greater that range, the more flexible we end up being, to the demands of whatever might come our way, right? So if with high heart rate variability, we can pretty easily move from sitting at our desk, sipping coffee, to solving an unexpected really big problem, or strolling along and suddenly realizing we're late, and being able to make a sprint for whatever it is that we're going. So the ability to change our level of activation very, very quickly, both physiologically and emotionally, has a lot to do with heart rate variability and that greater range of activation that our body is constantly allowing to happen.
Awesome. So Dave, I got a question for you I've been dying to ask. So for a significant part of your life, you decided to lock yourself in a cage with a human being that pretty much is capable of killing you. So you made the logical choice to put yourself in a cage with a human being who's trained to kill you in multiple different ways. I know that's not the end outcome anybody, I don't think, wants in this, but as an MMA, and again, I've thought a lot about this. If I had this knowledge as a college athlete, and you took this to a stage, and MMA is interesting to me because there is no flight response, right? So what I've learned about that fight or flight response, usually we want to run away, because if there's a dude that could kill me in many ways, and I was there to fight the dude, I'd probably want to run as fast as I could. Would be you like, nope, we're in a cage, can't get out. And I wonder, like, I just try to put myself in that position mentally, because physically I would never want to do that to myself. For many reasons. But I kind of wonder how you look at this, because I would imagine as an MMA fighter, you want to be strategic to some extent. So you want that parasympathetic response, but it all seems sympathetic and fight. So I would love, and you can bring this into your professional work later on as well, but I just love to ask you, as somebody who put yourself, I guess, in a purely sympathetic fight kind of environment, how do you look at all this in your professional career as an MMA fighter?
So yes, former, right? Quite a bit. 10, 15 years ago, and much younger and possibly much less brains. But anyway, this is one of those things and I'm glad, because as you were saying, about this is what healthy looks like. This is what a well-functioning HRV, can do, how adaptable, how flexible you are. And something that I was thinking, we need to mention what dorsal vagal mode would look like, and what somebody with a low functioning HRV, when you don't have that flexibility. And actually, Matt, this kind of can tie it all together. Because most people who were going to get into a fight, this is a very scary thing, potentially the most scary thing that would happen to you in your life, or, and on aside from maybe a car accident or, a house fire or something like that. And for most people, they aren't going to have any kind of ability to access that prefrontal cortex. They are going to go into that full dorsal vagal mode where you are literally just fighting, running, right? Or possibly, you know, just shutting down completely, and I would say pooping yourself, you know, or something like that. So there would be no logical thought. Now that's where it's so important. Like what we do is practice, you know, practice with anything. Because the first time that you are exposed to any kind of a stressor, it is very high activation for your body. The second time you're exposed to that same stressor, it's lower. And the third time, even less, until eventually this thing that was so scary is now just something that happens every day. And this has become normal to you. So that's essentially what we're doing in practice is, you know, since, geez, I think I started boxing at like 12 years old, you know, and prior, and I played ice hockey, you know, growing up and everything too, which is basically fighting with skates on. So, you know, the combative, that highly competitive mode was always something that I was doing. That was not unfamiliar at all. And then just taking it to the next level, well, for somebody who's trained in it, who does it every single day, this is nothing. This is just what we do every single day. So to go in and have a very strategic thought, to have a very strategic game plan is extremely possible. It's no different to me than it would be, you know, for most people to go into the gym and lift weights. Now, granted, if I did that today, I think I might have a totally different reaction, but that's where it is. You know, we get that attenuation from continuous exposure to the same stress. Our body essentially stops reacting in that hyper responsive way, and we can actually start to think about it and have a real game plan. And that's the biggest thing. You know, you see, you would never meet a professional fighter of any kind who is a mean person. It's just, it doesn't really happen. And it's weird, but it is because I guess we've all learned to regulate ourselves to such a level that you kind of just stop responding to things that would get most people angry. Just be like, okay, man, that's cool, and that's kind of how most of them are. But yeah, so that's essentially what it is continuous exposure to the same stressor until it becomes an everyday thing. And I, you know, I think you guys could probably talk a whole lot more about that, on how that might happen in a negative sense as well, where people are exposed to, you know, abusive spouses, where people are exposed to, you know, other not so awesome things in life until it becomes just normal, you know. And I know that's partially what plays into PTSD and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, but from my standpoint, that's where we are at. And yeah, that hyper responsiveness does you absolutely no good. We always say that the last thing you want to do when you're fighting is be emotional in any way.
Yeah.
that loses you the fight really quick.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine that this is, you know, for you, you know, that strong parasympathetic nervous system played a huge role in the ability to be that well regulated. You know, so I think it's, you know, particularly in situations where your activation needs to be that high for such prolonged periods of time, and you still need to be able to think. You can't just be in that, you know, kind of what we typically think of as fight or flight, you know, just completely automatic, you know, kind of place, because that doesn't give you the ability to turn on your prefrontal cortex and think through what's going on. So I suspect that, you know, if you are strong and, you know, high heart rate variability enabled you to be at the high level of sympathetic activation while still being able to, you know, activate the proper parts of your brain and regulate yourself emotionally, as well as regulate yourself physically, and not just, you know, go to, you know, as high as your sympathetic is going to go, because that wasn't what you needed.
Absolutely. And I would have loved to have known what my HRV was back then.
Yeah. Awesome. So, you know, I want to, so we talked about, you know, some of a deeper kind of definition of the sympathetic. I think we could probably say the same thing. I think the ventral vagal often gets rest and digest. And again, it just seems like way I don't even know if they're the right. Yeah, you do digest your food when you're regular, but there's like a lot, from the mental health perspective. There seems to like the social engagement, cognitive, all these other things going on. I do, because I think another a little bit of a question that comes out of this is, and Dave brought up the dorsal vagal, that second branch of the vagus nerve. And I sort of wonder, like, because there's that phenomenon that sometimes I'll have where I'll have low heart rate, but also low heart rate variability. And usually it's around exhaustion. It's I have a late flight home after training somewhere for 5 straight days. I'm feeling happy, but I'm also tired. And then I get this horrible HRV score, even though my heart rate's not that high. So I want to bring this part from the mental health perspective. Dave talked about the shutdown or freeze response, but I'd love to get your thinking on this as well.
Yeah, well, I'm going to come right back to the concept of self-regulation. We do typically think of sympathetic and parasympathetic as stress and relaxation, and I introduced it that way too. And that's actually not a helpful way to look at it, because the parasympathetic nervous system is so much more than just relaxation. I mean, yes, it's necessary for resting. Yes, it's necessary for digestion. So the rest and digest, yes, it's a part of it, but it's just a part of it. And we really need to remember, the whole spectrum of functioning here. A parasympathetic nervous system that's not functioning well, underlies depression, right? Where, people are continuously feeling just, exhausted, physically and emotionally, not interested in much of anything, where their mood is really down. And it's really hard for them to motivate themselves to do things, sometimes as supposedly simple as getting out of bed, to things like, getting out and seeing friends, or, participating in hobbies, or, getting their work done. So you would seem like, well, the parasympathetic nervous system is too strong or something. And again, that's not the case. The situation there is that, people who have depression tend to have lower heart rate variability, and they tend to have low vagal tone, meaning that the parasympathetic nervous system, the vagal nerve, is having trouble regulating activation in general. Because, just like, Dr. Dave, when he needed to activate to that super high level, he needed a strong parasympathetic nervous system in order to be able to do that. It's the same thing with, days when we're just kind of feeling really, really blah. We need a strong parasympathetic nervous system in order to be able to get out of that state.
So when you were talking specifically about depression, so because I think our oversimplification, we miss this a little bit, which I appreciate this deep dive. So we're not necessarily talking about an overly strong ventral vagal response, but we're also not seeing, I don't think, an overactive sympathetic reaction too. So this phenomenon that I believe is pretty common for what I've seen, and please correct me if I'm wrong, of, folks that are struggling to have the energy that they need, with depression. And I know that that's just one of the many, many symptoms of depression. So if it's not an over vagal reaction, I guess suppressing, and there's not a overactive sympathetic, is this where the dorsal vagal sort of comes into play here? And sort of what's going on biologically that kind of manifests in that mental health condition?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, the overall heart rate variability is low, right? And that includes, heart rate variability has the sympathetic and the parasympathetic components, right? So, the whole thing is just low, right? So the person is not able to activate properly. And, when it comes to the two branches, of the vagal nerve, the nervous system is not able to recruit its healthiest coping mechanisms, right? And kind of when the that higher level of response, right? Of reaching out to people at times of stress, reaching out for social support. When that is, when that fails or when that's not available for whatever reason, oftentimes having to do with past experiences, sometimes having to do with present experiences, then we retreat to that more basic level of functioning. That's where, we can sometimes get stuck, and that's where your heart variability is low, and, your sympathetic activation is not doing particularly well, neither is your parasympathetic activation. So, you're not feeling safe, right? As much as anxiety is all about not feeling safe, depression is not about not feeling safe as well. If you think about it from the evolutionary standpoint, it's your body's way of kind of making you hide until you can regain a sense of safety. And when that's happening in a scary situation, that's great. That's what should happen. When it happens for a day or two, that's okay. We recover from that easily. But when that's happening, and actually sometimes it can happen when we have been overdoing it, right? If you've been, overtraining or over traveling or overworking or over anything, just, doing too much, the body at some point is going to be like, wait a second, right? We really need to, get back to some basics here, right? We need to retreat a little bit. So that can be okay too. The problem becomes when this becomes a chronic condition, right? When we're in that, I'm not safe, I need to hide. There is no real danger, and I kind of know that, but I still feel like I need to hide because coming out of that hiding spot seems incredibly dangerous. So that's where we get in trouble. And the good news is that heart rate variability training, heart rate variability biofeedback can help people get out of that. As I mentioned earlier, lots of really great research recently, in particular, showing that heart rate variability biofeedback, even just by itself, it's best with some therapy, but even just by itself is helpful in symptoms of depression.
And so, Dave, I kind of wanted to just, and this is just kind of out of curiosity, if you see somebody maybe coming to you with more anxiety or more depression, do you at all customize your approach for that individual? Did you have different ways of thinking about how you can help from your perspective, kind of bring people maybe that are more anxious back into balance or more depressed back into balance?
Yeah. So, I mean, with anybody regardless, but especially with people, who are on one side of that spectrum, the approach in general is different. And I think this is something that you guys understand. You get a feel for once you've been in practice for a while, that when somebody walks in, you can kind of you can accept their energy, and you can kind of start to, okay, joking with this person is not going to go well. Hands-on is not gonna go well. You can see where these things might frighten this person. These things might send this person further away. And the things that we want to be aware of as practitioners is that we're not making our patients put up a wall, because that's gonna deteriorate the level of services that we can provide to them. So I over-explain what I'm doing. I always ask permission when it's going to come time for touch palpation of any kind. I never ask a patient to expose themselves in any way or put themselves in any kind of a position where they might feel vulnerable, because I know these things, especially for somebody, who's having some emotional dysregulation, that could set them over the edge. And even if it didn't do that, it's going to make my therapy much less effective. Mm-hmm. And that's my concern. I want to make sure that the way that I affect a patient, everything that happens to a patient when they are with me, is only a positive experience. So that way they continue coming back, they continue to get good results. And then if I really see this as a major problem, they're going to take my advice when I say, hey, you know what? This is something that we need to work with another professional on. And I want you to really take this seriously and go make an appointment with this person. And then they actually do it because they really trust me. They know that I'm somebody that they can trust. That's more my approach with that is just everything making them aware, comfortable.
Excellent. Ina, any final words? I know we're getting to the wrap up point, but I just want to on this sort of 101 from the mental health perspective. Is there anything that I have missed and should have asked you along the way for us to better understand this very complex, again, I think way oversimplified and a lot of how we talk about, but anything else that you'd like our listeners to know and sort of this, as we wrap up sort of this 101 introduction to the vagus nerve?
I really think you got it. You asked, all the most important questions. I would probably just end with the thought of just how important it is to look at anything that's, we traditionally think of mental health as very much mind-body related, right? And the vagal nerve is an epitome of mind-body connection. It quite literally connects your mind and your body, right? It innervates, all the organs, in your body, except for the adrenal glands, right? And it has projections, into the brain, and, it works to regulate the mind and the body. So, if you're talking about depression or anxiety or PTSD or, chronic pain and hypertension and, headaches, people tend to put those into different buckets. This is physical, this is emotional, but really they all have the same underlying foundation. Yes, different manifestations, obviously different symptoms, different situations. So there's a lot of, there's a lot that's unique to each one of those, but there are, that underlying mind-body foundation is the common thread, and I think that's really important for us to pay attention to that. And this is where the vagal nerve comes in.
Awesome wrap up here, and I just think it's so exciting, and this journey that I've been on is we can quantify this now. It's as so much guesswork. I think historically. From the mental health, I mean, the medical folks might have labs. I know Dave might have X-ray. There's in the mental health field, I just always felt like I was a physician without, any of those labs, any of the X-rays to really see where the person was at. But to me, the really exciting thing, whether I'm looking at my N of one of myself or the work in mental health, is we can quantify the impact of our treatment and our interventions in a way that just wasn't really easy to do just a few years ago. So that's where I hope our listeners get excited with this with us, because we've got resonant frequency, we've got biofeedback, we've got a lot of respiratory sinus arrhythmia, a lot of things to continue this discussion moving forward. And I also just if the listeners didn't go back to some of Dr. Dave's earlier episodes as well, as we go into some of the HRV basics around this stuff, with diet, exercise, those sort of things too. I think that's a great, if you haven't gone back there, those will fit in really good after this episode as well. So Ina, Dave, thank you so much. I've learned a lot for this, and I can't wait for our next discussion.
Thank you. So good to talk to you as always.